Hello, welcome to our 2016 The Kidney Project live Q&A session. We're so pleased that many of you are joining us today online. Along with I am Shuvo, the Technical Director of the Kidney Project, and along with me is Dr. William Fissell, the Clinical Director of the Kidney Project. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Shuvo. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted that you're here joining us today.
Terrific. So in a few moments, we'll start going through some of the questions that have been posted, but let me start off by saying thanks to many of you. We are pleased with the progress that we've made over the past year. We've had not only increased awareness, we've had people help us on a voluntary basis. We've also made scientific and technical progress, as well as progress on the policy front here within the United States. Of note is a sizable grant that we received from the U.S. National Institutes of Health. And this grant will allow us to move the project to the next key milestone. Clearly, this is an ambitious project. We've got lots of steps we have to go through, but today we'll take the opportunity to answer some of the questions that have come up, both on the funding side as well as the technical side. So without much ado, I'll turn now over to the first question that Dr. Fissell will answer. And the first question, Bill, is the device, it's showing up on your screen, is the device working in animals today?
Yes, so I actually don't see the questions popping up for me, but I'll be happy to answer them. So yes, we have made extraordinary progress in a couple of key areas with the implantable artificial kidney. To set the stage for the answer, there are many implanted medical devices available today. And these are things that most everybody's heard of. These are things like pacemakers, vascular grafts, stents, and now in the last 10 years, these implanted mechanical pumps for patients with heart failure. But the story is all the same among all these devices. Any device that is in constant contact with blood, like the implantable artificial kidney, is plagued by two things. Is plagued by clotting of blood that comes in contact with the artificial materials of the device, and it's plagued by the body's reaction to the device, where the body tries to coat anything that's artificial. So our focus for the past 3, 4, 5 years has been on getting over that hump, developing the technologies necessary for us to be able to place a device in the vasculature, permanently connected to the blood vessels. None of this dialysis fistula, needle in and out kind of stuff. None of this dialysis catheter getting uncapped and capped and uncapped and capped again. A permanent connection. That's got to be a pretty good device to go not for a 4-hour dialysis session, not for a 1-year waiting on the heart transplant wait list, but for years and years and years in the life of a patient with kidney failure. So what did we do? We worked on understanding blood flow in detail in the device, and we worked on chemical coatings to block the body's reaction to the device. So yes, we are routinely implanting this device. We are seeing these filters filter blood. We are seeing that there are no side effects. This thing is not shedding clots into the rest of the organism. So I'd say, yeah, we see device working in animals, absolutely.
Thank you, Bill. For the next question, we'll go to a question from Marie Gallagher, which says, why aren't people donating to this? Are you guys reaching out to people like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates? So Marie, thank you for that question. The short answer is we're reaching out to everyone we can, both within the United States and worldwide. Now, for people with lots of wealth are obviously desirable from a funding perspective. We have reached out to a number of them. Many of them have foundations that we have to go through, and we are making the appropriate overtures. But we should also be aware that many of these people have their own causes that they're supporting. And we have to get the awareness up to a level so that they see that this disease, kidney failure, and the solution we are developing is something worthy of their support. So we are clearly working on that. What we could do is leverage your support in reaching out to the people like the people you mentioned and others that you know, and make them aware of what our project is about, and see if we can't bring them to the team. We'll be happy to work with you to do that as well.
Yeah, so let me toss in another observation. There are a number of organizations that push private donors, that fundraise, that lobby governments for funding for specific disease problems. So you might hear about the American Cancer Society. You might hear about the Susan Komen Race for the Cure. You might hear any of a number of organizations that are vocal about getting a cure for a bad disease. And kidney failure, as you all know, is a bad disease. There's a key difference, though. When you see spokespeople for other organizations, it's often the context of a survivor, a breast cancer survivor. Dialysis patients, there's not really that much of a thing of a dialysis patient survivor. If they're a dialysis patient survivor, they're busy at dialysis. They're not in Washington, D.C. banging on doors. So there's dialysis patients, in my experience, are overwhelmed by the pressures that our treatment for the disease offers today. So the ability of individual patients to advocate for the whole community of patients with renal failure is in part hampered by the treatment that we provide. So yes, we would love to get the word out as much as we can.
Thank you, Bill. All right, let's move on to the next question, which comes to us from Noah Sugarman. And he asks, how much will the device cost? So let me take a first pass stab at this. Since the device is still under development, it is impossible to say what it will actually cost for a patient. But we can take some lessons from other medical devices that have been developed and marketed to help us get to some sort of an answer. So there's the cost of development, and we have a fairly good idea of what that cost is to make the device go through the clinical trials. Separate from that is what will it cost the patient to have this device. And clearly there will be a cost that is driven partly by the development cost, but also by the business of the procedure, the procedural costs, the element that will take to get the device to the patients, the surgeon, and the follow-up and whatnot. Typically, if we look at other implanted devices, say from the artificial hearts, like a pacemaker or a orthopedic implant, those can guide us onto how much it will cost for a device like ours. When you price the device, you look at it both in terms of surgical costs and the cost of the device. In the United States, it is estimated that a transplant surgery, and both the surgery itself as well as the procurement, can cost about $100,000 or above. And a lot of that is around the process and the surgery. We anticipate that we'll have a similar surgery, except we don't have the procurement costs associated with the organ. Knowing what we know about manufacturing costs, we can project that the device will cost few thousands to tens of thousands of dollars to manufacture. But then you add in the costs of distribution, and marketing, we estimate that it will be costing in the order of $10,000s. And this is a number we can only put out with a disclaimer that it will change as we get closer to market. So another way to look at it is if this device works, or rather, which is when it works, what are the benefits to the patient? We know that Medicare today in the United States spends about $33,000 per kidney transplant patients and about $90,000 for dialysis patients. We also know that we're not a transplant organ and we will not require the same level of drugs. So we anticipate that will be probably at the cost of maintenance of transplant or less. And the number you've seen on Facebook has been on the order of $30,000 as a guideline based on what we know about the cost of transplant maintenance in the United States. All right, let's move to the next questions, which is from Art Stuff. And let me read it out. So it says, my nephrologist is very skeptical about this new artificial kidney. He says I should not get my hopes up. Where can my nephrologist find out and review technical and medical data on the artificial kidney so he can better advise and treat me in relationship to me? We have a nephrologist on our team, and there's Dr. Fissell. Dr. Fissell, I turn this over to you to see how this patient may actually connect with his nephrologist about the artificial kidney.
Well, skepticism is healthy, right? So we are committed to providing actual data about our device, what it does, what it might offer, and for whom it would be appropriate. When we think about end-stage renal disease, there's patients for whom a preemptive transplant is the right answer. There are patients for whom home hemodialysis is the right answer. There are patients for whom peritoneal dialysis is the right answer. And so we are deeply committed to providing in the peer-reviewed medical literature data about the performance of our device. We're deeply committed to spreading the word about that through the peer-reviewed medical literature, because all nephrologists, me, your nephrologist, we practice evidence-based medicine. We look at the data and we make treatment decisions based on what the data says. Now, skepticism may be warranted. We have a very ambitious project. This has been the holy grail since shortly after Kolff successfully dialyzed a patient in the Netherlands in the 1940s. We have interesting technologies that we think get us to the point where we can create an implanted device, doesn't require any external power, doesn't require any external connections, that merges new technologies in silicon nanofabrication with new developments in cell culture technology to make a biohybrid device. As we move through our preclinical studies, as we move through our cell culture development, as we move through our pilot human studies, the data will be developed and published that will let anybody, a patient, a nephrologist, a cardiologist, a primary care doc, look at the data and decide, is this the right thing for me?
Thank you. Let me quickly take a question from email that has been sent to us. And it states, how soon can the device be available? Thank you for that question, and we'll respond via Google, and hopefully you're watching. So when we had laid out our plan, we felt that with the right progress, we could get to the first set of clinical trials in 2017. And that's largely dependent on both the progress and the funding that we have to date. Now, the device will be rolled out in stages, both to demonstrate safety to the regulatory agencies and also to help us improve components that need further improvement. So we are hopeful that the device will be on the market for everybody as a product towards the end of the decade. And that should allow, but prior to that, we'll be working with regulatory agencies such as the FDA, medical centers in the US and around the world to roll out the device through a series of clinical trials. Okay, next question is from Sudhakar Reddy. It states, I am 42 years old. Since from birth, I'm having only one kidney. Now it's functioning at about 38%. Am I a candidate to receive the artificial kidney? Bill, maybe you can answer this.
So I think first I have to provide the disclaimer that in the absence of a clinical environment, I can't provide medical advice about an individual patient. That would be irresponsible. However, let me talk about the patients for whom this device would be intended. Typically, patients require something to be done, a preemptive transplant, peritoneal dialysis, hemodialysis, something. When kidney function falls to about 10, 8, 7% of what you were born with. And there's typically some trigger that pushes the nephrologist to take the big step of saying, look, it's time that we talk about a procedure to relieve the symptoms that you're having. It could be problems with recurrent high potassium levels. Some of you have experienced that. And despite drugs and despite diet and despite this and despite that, the potassium levels stay high. And the nephrologist says, look, you've been in the hospital a bunch of times for this. Maybe it's time we start dialysis and try to keep you out of the hospital. Another patient, it might be fluid overload. Keep waking up at night drowning. Keep waking up at night with trouble breathing. Keep being admitted to the hospital, short of breath. Those things happen when your kidney function has fallen by 90%. Somebody who's got 38% of their kidney function, 40% of their kidney function, 60% of their kidney function, 15% of their kidney function, probably is not going to enjoy an immense benefit from an implantable artificial kidney or dialysis or any of the that are available to treat renal failure. We think about renal failure in terms of metrics of how much the kidney is cleaning the blood. You may have heard some of these acronyms and words thrown around: creatinine clearance, GFR, eGFR, a number of other lab tests and predictive equations that we use to look at a patient and say, gosh, we think that your kidneys are functioning about this much. 38%, it's not 100%. It's a lot more than 8%. So that's not the kind of patient where we think that the risk of a surgery, the risk of an implant of an artificial device balances the imagined benefit of another 20 or 30% of kidney function provided by the device. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, Bill. So let's move down to the next question, which is, if you are already part of the FDA 2.0 process, why aren't you accelerating the development? Well, the short answer is not. And being part of the process is helping us get through the development cycle faster than we would otherwise have. So what do I mean by that? So typically when you start developing medical devices, you have to interact with the FDA after you've frozen your design. They ask you to do some testing. You come back with the data. They look at the data. Many times they'll say, okay, we need some additional elements of the elements of your device to be tested. You go back, do that, come back. It's a process. It has worked, but a criticism in the past has been that it's been slow, and it has frustrated the pace of innovation. By being part of the FDA innovation pathway, and there's two programs, the Innovation Pathway 2.0 and now a more recent one called the Expedited Access Pathway, we're able to work with the FDA scientists, reviewers, and leadership to streamline the review process. So we know what milestones we'll have to hit for the device to be considered safe and ultimately efficacious for patients. So we are very much working very closely together, and we have a map laid out for the development pathway. The second element of this is funding. Funding that will let us do the device development iterations that we can generate data and show to the regulatory bodies and the scientific and clinical communities. The FDA does not give us funding for that. That's the funding we rely on through grants and the philanthropic community. At this stage, we are very well integrated with the Innovation Pathway 2.0. We work with them very well. Our limitation is the funding that we have to generate to design recurring iterations of the device and test them. So the acceleration right now is limited more by funding than by the FDA.
Shuvo, let me add to that with a concrete example. Typically, despite the pre-IDE meetings that companies have with the FDA regarding a device, despite the advice of experts in regulatory affairs, there's an awful lot of uncertainty around what the FDA is actually going to ask of the company. And so the company usually tries to put together a pretty big bundle of information, even before they have the first discussion with the FDA. And we had laid out a development timeline that we approached the FDA and said, we think this is probably reasonable. And the FDA turned to us and they said, well, we actually think that part's a little bit of overkill. We don't think that you need to do that now. And that took us from a first approach to a human trial from, Shuvo, you can fill in, from 2018, early 2019, back to 2017. So that involvement with IP 2.0 and with EAP, if you want acceleration, they just cut 18 months off of our project by being able to have a frank and open conversation about what their concerns were, what our concerns were, and both of us sharing a preeminent emphasis on patient safety, number one, don't want to hurt anybody, and getting it into patients as soon as we can, number two. So this process did accelerate things for us already.
Absolutely. And let me just add one more thing. This is a unique program, so we are pleased to be part of it. And in some ways, it's a pilot program, so there's some learning on both sides. But what we are very grateful for is the close interactions we have with the FDA community. It is very easy for us to talk to them, explain to them where we are, and they can spend time and explain to them what their data needs and concerns might be. And together we come up with a series of milestones that will allow us predetermine ahead of time, figure out what milestones we need to meet so we can get to a quicker approval down the line. All right, maybe a follow-up question here, which is, since the beginning, I'm repeating, you've requested 10 million to complete the human trial, and now you have 6 million. Why are you requesting another 10 million? So first of all, I just want to be clear on the numbers. These numbers may be floating around, and let me put the numbers in context for the overall product development. I'm not sure you actually saw the 10 million, but with maybe in some element of a discussion somewhere on Facebook. Since the beginning, we laid out that we'd probably need about $20 million US to get through the first set of clinical trials. Now, prior to the recent NIH funding that you've read about, we could break down the cost of the device for the different components. There's a filtration component, there's a cell biology component, and there's a component, and then there's a work that brings the both of them together. The device development is about 13 million. This is from our initial estimates. This new NIH grant of $6 million is spread over 4 years. And if it comes as we expect it to on time, it means we'll get $1.5 million per year. Now we have set an ambitious deadline, right? That we need to get to a 2017 milestone of the first clinical trials. So because of our prior funding, we still are only going to get $1.5 million. To make that gap up, to hit 2017 milestone, if we are able to, will require the additional $10 million. I think that's where you're coming from. Nevertheless, let's just talk more broadly about what it takes to get a medical device to market. So once we do the clinical trials, we'll then have to think in terms of scaling up and manufacturing distribution. And typically, there's usually a couple of cycles of that. And if you look at the heart valve industry, the pacemakers, the orthopedic implants, the business side of medical implants is usually in the tens of millions of dollars. But we are hopeful that with the relationship with the FDA, the NIH grants, and the work we'll be able to do, we'll be able to get to the first set of patients and show that we are feasible as a therapy for the total of $20 million. After that, there's a business consideration that has to be taken into account. Now, we know from talking to a lot of the business community, the investor community, they've put to us a challenge. Come to us when you have this device in humans. Prior to that, you're not really an investable proposition because they think the technology is too early, the timeline is too high, the investors will not want that kind of a risk and timeline. So the challenge to us as a community is that we have to go out and raise this additional funding to get to the first in human from grants and the community.
So Shuvo, I think that's an important insight. If I recall correctly, that response that this implantable artificial kidney needs to already be in humans, that was a little bit of a moving goalpost. If I recall, in 2006, 2007, that requirement was not so stringent. In 2005, 2006, 2007, if I recall, investors wanted to see the preclinical work completed and were interested in maybe participating in this project before the first human study. Now, in 2015, 2016, with the financial events that have happened in the last decade, I think that goalpost for where an investor would be willing to participate has moved. And so there's a chunk of work that in 2004 we expected would be happening under the aegis of a for-profit investor in a company to move this forward. And today, that work is happening in a university setting rather than a company. So that may also explain why, if you look back 2003, 2004, 2005, and you pluck numbers out of discussions that we had then, and you compare them to the discussions that we have today, the numbers may not match up because where we need to get to be able to excite investor participation is a different goalpost.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification, Bill. I think it's important to recognize that what we can do is to deliver a proof of concept that will excite the investor community. And Bill is absolutely right. In the old days, it was preclinical and benched up. After the 2009, 2010 economic downturn and the state of the medical device industry, the goalpost has moved farther down. We really have to take it to the first in man. And if we do find strategic investors who are willing to come in earlier, that would be great. So let's move to another question, and we'll take as a hold on. Once approved, how long will it take for the device to become available to the general public? And I think this relates to the question that we had just now. So we expect, typically after the device is approved, which means that it's ready, we should make it available to the general public right away. And there's no lag time between approval and making it public. There's going to be, and we are working already with some partners in the business community to make sure that we're setting the right kind of relationship so that when we are ready after the clinical trials to scale up into manufacturing and distribution, that they will help us. So we feel that everything going according to plan, we should be able to make it available to the general public as soon as all the clinical trials are done, which we hope will be done later this decade. Let's go to another question, which is also related to funding. Have you thought about going to the public to get funds? Meaning creating a company that will be a commercial company later. So the answer, again, relates to what we have talked about. We can certainly create a company, and we are working with our university technology transfer offices and interested partners to protect the intellectual property, to find opportunities to monetize that intellectual property, and even develop some of that under the auspices of a company. To fund that company will require risk capital. And the venture capital community is not ready to invest at this stage. There will be once we go further downstream with more preclinical data, and as I said, preferably first in man data. Now you may be asking about, can we create a company that's on Wall Street and IPO? That is frankly something we're not able to do at the kind of stage we have, and to raise the kind of money to do an initial public offering is currently not what we have the capacity for. All right, let me send a question that comes from Vietnam. So Tan asks, hi, I'm from Vietnam. Will foreigners be considered for clinical trial if you're willing to come to the US? And second, can a patient infected with hepatitis be implanted with this device? Do they need to clear all infections first? Dr. Fissell.
So in general, the institutional review boards in the United States that govern clinical trials of drugs, of devices, of procedures, of whatever, I have never seen one that has any citizenship criteria associated with them. So I don't imagine that there's a structure whereby someone would look at an altruistic volunteer who wants to dedicate themselves to helping move this technology forward by being an experimental subject in a clinical trial and say, hey, look, you're from this country, you're from that country, Canada, Mexico, Switzerland, and say, oh yeah, you come in, you don't. That doesn't seem like that's a real issue to me. I think the bigger issue for an altruistic volunteer who might consider coming from overseas to work with us is our emphasis on safety. Are you willing to stay here long enough to come for the post-op visits? If instead of in a pilot and feasibility study, maybe a candidate is interested in an efficacy study or a cost effectiveness study that might be required for an insurer to pay, that might be quite a long period of time in the United States here with us. And so I don't see any reason to pick and choose among altruistic volunteers. I think the emphasis is first, second, third, fourth, and fifth on safety. Regarding hepatitis C, pretty much all humans harbor viruses in them somewhere. Some of them are causing trouble, like hepatitis C. Some of them are there but kind of quiescent, like many patients who've had chicken pox and later develop shingles in the context of some threat to their immune system. Unlike a transplant, where a patient needs 2 or 3 drugs to turn off their immune system to be able to tolerate the transplant organ. In the implantable artificial kidney, the barrier is built into the device. The scaffold on which we grow these cells has pores that are small enough that the molecular effectors of the human immune system, both the innate and the acquired immune system, cannot get from the recipient of the implantable artificial kidney to the cells of the implantable artificial kidney and attack them, and nor can, as far as we know, the cells in the implantable artificial kidney alloimmunize the recipient and adversely affect their opportunities for a renal transplant down the road. So when a patient comes to transplant clinic, and I'm not a transplant nephrologist, I don't specialize in transplants, one considers whether the drugs that effectively turn off the patient's acquired immune system, these are things like cyclosporin and tacrolimus and mycophenolate mofetil that have revolutionized transplant, really made transplant possible at all. When you think about these drugs and you think about the patient, you ask yourself, well, if I turn off this immune system, is some catastrophe going to develop? Does this patient, for example, have an incompletely treated cancer that will rise up in the context of immune suppression? Does this patient harbor a virus that could rise up and cause trouble once immune suppression is removed? If you look at other studies in kidney disease where patients get a lot of immunosuppression, these are autoimmune kidney diseases, you always see in a 100 or 200 person clinical trial, you see a handful of patients who received the immunosuppressive drug and something catastrophic happened. They had a horrible infection. Something bad happened. So you have to kind of understand that the emphasis that you may have heard previously about hepatitis C or a virus is largely in the context of the anticipation that you'll need to be immunosuppressed to receive a transplant. For our device, we anticipate exactly 0 systemic immunosuppressive drugs. So unless there's something that we're not aware of, for example, hepatitis C can sometimes stimulate the body to make immense quantities of very large antibodies against hepatitis C, and those can clog the kidneys filters, and I suppose, and we'll have to find out, that they might be able to clog the artificial kidneys filters as well, but we don't know that yet. We haven't tested that yet. We haven't seen that yet. So I suppose there could be a problem, but as of today, I see no barriers.
So Bill, maybe to follow up on that line of thought, we also have a question of somebody who specifically mentions HIV. Would that be a similar issue also for HIV and hepatitis?
So the world of HIV has changed dramatically in the last 5 or 10 years. So a disease that was a uniformly fatal disease when I was, in college and maybe even in medical school, where you saw patients routinely admitted to hospital with life-threatening infections, has now become a fairly manageable chronic disease if you can afford to pay for the medicines. And now most transplant programs around the country are open to listing patients with HIV for a deceased donor renal transplant. And so if that's in the United States, and the outcomes are good. So if a patient is a candidate for a renal transplant, is on the wait list, I don't see any reason why the implantable artificial kidney should pose some special problem. Any artificial device, any prosthetic device, whether it be a hip, a valve, a stent, a pacemaker wire, whatever, it's always a risk for infection. And if a patient has a decreased ability to fight infection, it's always a worry. It's never not going to be a worry. So I think time will tell. As of today, I see no immediate barrier. Are there things that make me concerned and that I want to look for? Absolutely. But no, it's not a checkbox on our list. I think it's something that we'll consider as time goes along, but there's no obvious exclusion anyway.
All right, thank you. I think let's move back to a little bit on the FDA side again. And one of the questions that has come up is, has our device been successfully tested in animals? And I think Bill answered that question. Yes, we have tested. We've begun to test in animals. And what we want to do is try to move the testing into a systematic preclinical testing protocol that will let us generate the data we need for the FDA studies. So we definitely are there. Now, a related question which follows with this is, has the FDA approved our clinical studies? And once we complete them, are we approved? The short answer to that is no, that's not true. The FDA is working with us to help design the kind of clinical study we'll need to do. And we're working with them ahead of time so that when we have the data and they see the data, and hopefully we meet all the milestones that we've all agreed to together, they will approve us. This is not about getting pre-approved. This is about streamlining the approval process so that we're not hung up in bureaucratic cycles. So it's important to just be aware that we're not pre-approved, but rather we are approved to work with them in a streamlined manner so that once we're completed, there's a high likelihood of confidence that the FDA, because they know our design and we've been working with them, we can spend less time going through the regulatory approval process and we can get to market faster.
Let me add to that for a moment. When I think it's safe to say that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration that we've worked with, and we are in agreement about the structure of the first human trials, that what we're going to need to do, what data we're going to need to collect, how we're going to do this, who we're going to approach for enrollment, what kinds of patients are appropriate. We have agreement with them about that. So I think we have a lot of confidence that as we move forward, we can proceed with that and not be waylaid by some new demand that came out of left field that we're not aware of. So has the FDA approved us? No. Has the FDA pre-approved us? No. Are the FDA and Dr. Roy and I in agreement about how this is going to go forward? And this is not just nudge, nudge, wink, wink awareness. These are written documents for protocols that the FDA has already seen and said, yes, this is the way to go forward. So it's pretty specific, and I think it gives us confidence that we're not going to have an unpleasant surprise when we come back to the Food and Drug Administration and say, look, this is what we're going to need to do.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. And the related question is, do we both believe, I guess it's to me and you, that this device will work successfully after the end of the testing period and it will be approved? Again, related to everything we're saying, we are very excited by what this device promises to do. We're also very confident of the preliminary data that we already have at hand that suggests to us a high level of confidence that we will get to a functional device that the FDA will approve. So in the long and short way of saying that is we are very confident that we are on the track to show feasibility and success. But again, just to be aware and to put the disclaimer, there is always the possibility for some iterations. There's always the possibility that something that has to be redone slightly a little bit. But I think I speak for Dr. Fissell as well and the rest of my team, is that we are very excited about delivering on this promise because this project is largely an engineering project. We're building on scientific foundations that have been established for some time. So we're bringing the engineering toolkit to bear, and as you all may know, the engineering toolkit will get us to a functional device, but we may have to take a couple of iterations to get to the prototype that we need to achieve.
Let me be a little more forceful about that. So I have been pursuing this goal of a better life for patients with end-stage renal disease because I believe in it. Full stop. There's no gray area here. I'm doing this. This is my entire career. I have no other career than this, which is working full-time on technology development so that the lives of patients with kidney failure, the lives of the patients that I met back in 1988 when I was a paramedic, hauling patients back and forth from home to the dialysis unit and back again, and watching them slowly dribble away and die like candles burning down their wicks, those patients can have the promise of a better life. I'm doing this because I believe in it, not some faith-based religious belief, but the data speaks to it. We've worked on this. If at any point I thought this wasn't going to work, we have purposely tried to find every single barrier that we could, whether it be regulatory approvals, whether it be mechanical issues, whether it be cell culture issues. We have been trying to find ways, trying to identify barriers, and we've been overcoming them one by one. If we run into something, we'll be the first to tell you. But I'm doing this because I believe in it. And I believe in it because we've been working on this for a decade. And every single step that we've taken, we've made progress. And we'll continue to make progress. And so for the first time in my career, Dr. Roy and I are actually willing to give dates. That's a big statement from us, that we're willing to say we think we'll be able to enroll our first patients in a clinical trial of our technology in 2017. We weren't saying that in 2001. We weren't saying that in 2002, 2003. We waited until we had confidence in the technology to be able to say, these are the specific steps that we need to take to get from where we are to a human subject. And now we're at that point where we can say that. So yes, I believe this will be working, and I believe this will be working soon.
Thank you, Bill. Let me take this into the question that comes up. How will I know when the clinical trials will start, and how I can track the progress of them, and how long is the trial period? So we've answered this question with the FDA in a couple of settings, but let me just tell you a little bit about how you will know. So the best way you can keep up with our project, where we're putting up updates all the time, is through our Facebook page. And our project coordinator, Dr. Fissell, and myself constantly monitor it. We try to answer your questions in a timely manner. So any news about clinical trials, any news about a scientific progress that we think we should let out to the world know about getting us faster to clinical trials, will go through the Facebook page. On the same Facebook page, there is a form that you can fill in where we actually take people who are interested in being part of the clinical trials. It's not a clinical trial list, but people who are interested in being considered will reach out to them when the timing is right. So please look on the Facebook webpage. Let me move to a question that somebody brought up, and this is something I want Dr. Fissell to address, is will this device be able to provide the metabolic needs of that a human kidney provides? And also related, how much improvement would I expect in my quality of life?
So I don't think that either Dr. Roy or I are sufficiently arrogant to plant a flag in the ground and say that we're going to make something as good as the kidney you were born with. That would be an overreach on our part, and I don't think you'll ever find that we claimed that. What we do claim, and what we will do soon, is have an implantable device that will get a patient enough waste removal that they'll be able to stay off dialysis. They will not be tethered to a dialysis unit where they have to go to the dialysis unit 3 times a week for 3, 4, 5 hours at a go, and then spend another 3, 4, 5 hours recovering from that session, losing half their life. We also anticipate, based on what we know about the transport behavior of the cells, that the dietary restrictions that plague dialysis patients, this diet that looks to me like it's celery and cardboard, that I scold patients for not wanting to take, we can liberalize patients' diets significantly. So the things that are really just out of touch for a patient today, a cheese pizza, an orange, a bowl of peas, those won't be a problem because we'll be able to dump phosphorus because our device will work around the clock rather than in these short bursts like conventional dialysis. So those are the quality of life issues. Other metabolic issues, these cells make vitamin D. Taking calcitriol tablets, probably you won't need to do that. Will this device provide perfect acid-base balance? Probably not, or at least probably not at first. You may need some help with that. You may need to take some bicarb pills or some oral citrate. And if you had CKD 4 or 5 for a while, you probably got used to doing that before you started dialysis. Will the implantable artificial kidney, as we are designing it now for these trials, be able to provide erythropoietin and get you away from them shots? No, it won't. Different cells produce erythropoietin in your body than we use in the implantable artificial kidney. Will all the metabolic functions of the kidney be present? No, absolutely not. Will this regulate your potassium perfectly? No, it will not. Will it get you out of the dialysis unit and let you go to work, let you go home, let you travel, let you be yourself, let you go out to dinner and maybe not stare at what everybody else is eating? Yes, that's the goal.
Thank you. We're getting close to our end of the session today, but maybe we'll take a couple more questions here. And one of the questions that I guess is a variation of an earlier question is, if the need arises and my condition worsens faster than expected, would I be able to get in on the clinical trials? And again, just to be very clear, we don't have a clinical trial waiting list now. We hope to get to the first trial somewhere in next year. And when we have the clinical trial waiting list, we'll reach out to everybody who's on that waiting list, and we'll go through this typical types of criteria that on a case-by-case basis, and along with input from your physician and our physicians, to determine if you'll be eligible for the clinical trial. But in short, we have no existing exclusions on the clinical trials that we have definitively put out there, except that you must be willing to come to a place where you're going to do the clinical trials. And after that, it's a case-by-case basis. Bill, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So the case-by-case basis part of things, I think that the transplant community sometimes struggles with this kind of black box of listing for a transplant. Are you listed? Are you listed on hold? Are you turned down? How was that decision made? Who made the decision? On what basis? Was it my color of my eyes? Was it the color of my hair? Was it because I missed a clinic appointment 2 years ago? I think there's a lot of emotion associated with that, and appropriately so. When Dr. Roy says a case-by-case basis, what we specifically mean is choosing a subject, a volunteer, who's at least risk of harm. So there are going to be exclusion criteria. If you have unfixed coronary artery disease and you've had a heart attack recently, it wouldn't be doing you any favors to take you to the operating room and subject you to a major vascular surgery. So if you are waiting for the transplant process to finish and you have a donor and you're just waiting for the mechanics to get done, there's no reason for us to tamper with the blood vessels that you'll need for that transplant. So when Dr. Roy says a case-by-case criteria, it's a case-by-case criteria based on your safety, on whether it's safe to take you to the operating room, whether by taking you to the operating room and subjecting you to a major surgery, are we putting your life at risk just to get information? That's the case-by-case that we're talking about, not Did you make all your clinic appointments? Did you smile? Have you had troubles? Did you goof up in the past? That's not the point. The point is that we don't want to hurt you.
So let me take a question that maybe our last question for now, and it's a question that we've answered in a previous Hangout, and we've also answered it online, but I think it's interesting and relevant enough that I want Dr. Fissell to answer. And the question is, do you have any idea of the device life and how long this device would last until you have to make changes of the cells or components of the device? So Bill, I know we've talked about this. We'll both answer this, and we'll also talk a little bit about where the cells are coming from. So maybe you want to start?
Sure. So again, let's put this against the framework of what we know about patients with kidney failure. I think that's probably the good starting point, because we are, after all, talking about something that is not yet in human trials. So as you look around the dialysis unit, you see some patients have catheters, some patients have fistulas, and some patients have grafts. And when we put a fistula in a patient, or we put in a graft in a patient, one patient might go 15 years with the same fistula and never have a problem. Maybe throw a stent in it once because they've got a little bit of narrowing at the surgery site. Another patient you meet, patient gets 3 fistulas in a row and none of them work. They get a graft and that clots too, and then they're stuck with a catheter. Every patient is a unique individual. So there's going to be patients where we are able to implant an implantable artificial kidney that's got an artificial hemofilter designed by Dr. Roy. It's got a cultured bioreactor of cells, building on the experience of David Humes at University of Michigan and his large-scale bioartificial kidney. And we put that in, and the patient does fine for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Come back, hey, how you doing? Good, okay. There's going to be another patient where we're all excited about the possibility, and we implant the device, and it thromboses, it clots right away. We do a declot procedure, we refresh the membranes, we refresh the bioreactor, we go back, we do it again, it clots again. There's going to be patients for whom this is an absolute success, and there's going to be patients for whom this is an immediate failure, and because that's been our experience, patients who are on dialysis for end-stage renal disease. Transplants are the same. You have one patient, they get a transplant, it's a good match. Transplant lasts for 16 years. Maybe they've got one mild rejection episode, they get admitted to the hospital, they get a burst of steroids to go home. Another patient, you get a transplant, looks like a good match as best as we can tell. Patient's diligent, they take all their pills, they do everything right, and they're in the hospital again and again and again with rejections until finally they revert back to dialysis. Every patient is a unique individual. What would you accept in exchange for not having to go to dialysis? What would you accept for being able to eat what you want? What would you accept? 2 years between procedures? Well, that's going to depend on how big a procedure it is, isn't it? You're not coming back for an open heart surgery every 2 years if you can help it. But something that could be done as an outpatient under conscious sedation, a minor procedure, go in, small incision, swap something out, close the incision, send you on your way. Maybe you would be willing to do that every 2 years. That's up to you. That's not up to us. Our target is 2, 3, 4 multiple years of uninterrupted function. Is that going to be possible for everybody? No. Is that going to be possible for most people? That's our goal. And that's what we've worked on. We're not thinking coming back 3 times a week to the dialysis unit. We're not thinking coming back every month for something, for a procedure. We're not thinking come back every year. We want to be able to have a surgeon sew this in and have you resume your life like you hadn't proceeded to end-stage kidney failure. That's our goal.
Thank you. I could not have said that better myself. Well, our time is up today, and I want to thank all of you for spending the time with us on Google Hangout. We enjoyed your questions. We tried to get through most of the questions. That if I have not gotten your question either via email or something that was sent and was not answered to the extent you thought it should be answered, please post on Facebook. Please send us an email. We'll be happy to do so, to provide additional answers. Let me end by saying that this is a team effort. Yes, there's a team of Dr. Fissell, myself, our labs, our colleagues around the country. It's a team that involves you. We know what the goal is. Dr. Fissell just clearly laid it out. We will get you off dialysis. You move away from going to a center 3 times a week. And we've talked about going without any replacement for years. To get there, we need to work with engineers, scientists, clinicians, and patients and their families. Our key effort now is to continue augmenting the funding we've received from philanthropy and from federal agencies so we can get to the key milestones that will allow us to get approval for a clinical trial. And once we get that, we feel confident that we can deliver a device that will give you a quality of life that's currently not possible for those on dialysis. So thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we'll talk again.